Hello and welcome to Transplants Take on Sport. My name's Lewis Daniels and my guest today is kidney and pancreas transplant recipient, hiker, volleyball player and superstar fundraiser Mark Smith. Mark chats to me about his experience with diabetes before his transplants, how he got into hiking and volleyball, and his attitude towards life after transplant. He also shares an incredible story about meeting his donor's parents, some of his hiking challenges, and which 3 people he'd like to go on a hike with, so please stick around to hear more. Mark is currently taking part in the 850 challenge for Kidney Care UK, so if you'd like to donate, you can do so by having a look at the link in the show notes. If you're enjoying the podcast, please make sure you press subscribe or follow wherever you normally listen, so you don't miss an episode. Mark Smith, welcome to Transplant Take on Sport.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming on. You are a kidney and pancreas transplant recipient and you are well into your hiking and you play volleyball at the Transplant Games. But to start with, you've been doing a challenge this year in aid of Kidney Care UK called the 850 Challenge. I actually got that wrong on Twitter the other day. I mentioned the wrong charity. It is in fact Kidney Care UK that you've been raising money for. And for those who aren't aware, what is the 850 Challenge and what made you decide to take it on?
Well, I do lots and lots of challenges, particularly in hiking over the years. And this year I wanted to do a challenge that was spread across the whole year. Initially, I was looking at doing 1,000 miles challenge. But Fiona Loud, who's one of the main figures at Kidney Care UK, pointed out a challenge that had been set up in the States called the 850 Challenge. Literally walking 850 miles through the year. And obviously, I know that's less than 1,000 miles. But what's important about the 850 number is it's representative of 850 million kidney patients throughout worldwide.
That's a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's around 1 in 9 people. So essentially, that brings a pertinence to the challenge as well. It brings in an awareness aspect too, because you can use that figure and the challenge to raise the awareness of kidney disease worldwide, which for me felt a much better and more noble thing to do, alongside obviously raising the money for both Kidney Care UK and for Friends of Harrogate Hospital, my local hospital here in Harrogate.
There's more meaning to 850 miles, even though it's less distance than 1,000. There's more of a connection to it for the reason that you're doing it. When
Absolutely.
did you start the challenge and how many miles have you walked so far?
I started the challenge on the 1st of January with the idea of it being across the whole year. I've got 213 miles left to walk, 637 miles I've walked already this year. And that's despite missing out 2 months of walking as well. I broke my little toe at one point, so I missed out 6 weeks of that and then had to isolate because all my family came down with COVID and we had to stay at home. Bizarrely, I didn't catch it at that time, but it still meant I couldn't go out and walk for obvious reasons.
Definitely the best thing to do. Stay in, keep yourself safe, keep everyone else safe.
Absolutely.
And as a podcast, as a person, I'd encourage anyone who is in that position to do that. Apart from those, were there any more challenges along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a few challenges over the years. One of the biggest I did was in 2016, where I walked Hadrian's Wall as a challenge. So I did 88 miles in 6 days. That had a great honour with it, which was to walk with my donor's mum.
We'll come on to that now then. It's a great story. We know that, as I said at the start, you've had a kidney and pancreas transplant, which came from a cadaveric donor.
It did.
With that sort of transplant, was a live donor ever an option? Was it out of the question because it was both organs?
It's pretty much out of the question, yes. Essentially, everyone needs a pancreas, so it's impossible to have a live donor, including a pancreas. Having the pancreas alongside the kidney was my choice. It's not necessarily a given operation like a kidney would be with kidney failure when you get to that point where you need a transplant. If you get to that point with a kidney and you need it, you can either get a cadaveric donor or you can get a live one from family members or from anybody who wants to do that, which is a very great and noble thing to do. With the pancreas, I was given that choice and I made that choice to have it because I've been diabetic for many years. It was the diabetes that caused the renal failure. And I felt at least having the pancreas would counter the diabetes causing any damage to the transplanted kidney. I was going beyond the immune suppression for life anyway. So fundamentally, the only and biggest difference to that operation was the length of operation it was. It also meant for me it could open up a lot more doors than I'd ever had before, at least spending some life without the issue of diabetes that hung over me. I used to have lots of really bad low blood sugars, which needed paramedic support. I'd be driving home from work and used to have really bad low blood sugars where I crashed out in the car while I was driving and didn't even know it was happening. So in many ways, I might not even be here because of that disease. So going for a pancreas was pretty much a no-brainer.
Sorry, I know we've dotted about a bit there. I just wanted to finish off a bit on the 850 challenge before we come right back into your
Of
transplant,
course.
just to get that all in at the start. Where have you been on your hikes to complete that?
For the challenge, I do a lot of local walks. Again, with the restrictions of not being able to go out to too many different places, but generally I go up into the Dales. Up here in Harrogate, we've got great access to the Yorkshire Dales, up is Nidderdale, Swaledale, all those sort of places, Wharfdale. Um, I'm very, very fortunate. I'm right on the north side of Harrogate, so I can be out into Nidderdale within 20 minutes of walking from here. So most of the walks I've done from home, but when I do walk, I tend to go out and do 15, 20 miles at a time. I've done a few local peaks. I've done the Yorkshire Three Peaks as part of another challenge, which I also included with this challenge too. So it's just really building up the miles, doing various walks locally rather than going out anywhere specific. I've done part of the Ebor Way, which is out over York Way, and part of the Wolds Way on a family holiday over to the coast. And I went and did some of that with my father-in-law. So just kind of dotted her out really, and just picked up the miles as and when, quite often on my own, sometimes with company, and it's amazing how quickly the miles add up.
Definitely, you can see so many places, especially living where you are. It must be, especially this year that we've had and everything that's been going on. You've been able to get out into the country and just clear your head, really.
Absolutely, I think that's really important as well. From a physical fitness is a mental fitness, and being able to just ground yourself. I got asked on Radio York once about going out walking in the middle of a pandemic when there'd be lots of people out walking, and should I be shielding at home and so on and so forth. But being an experienced walker, I have lots of access to lots of different programs that show me lots of different paths that a lot of people don't even know exist. So I'm able to plot routes that people aren't even aware of, and I never see anybody on those walks. And for me, that's part of walking. It's being able to go out into the great outdoors, just being part of nature, hearing the sounds around you, the rustling of the trees and the river as it runs past you, and just the sound of the breeze. And I think little things like that can make such a difference to your mental health as well. And at the same time, raising that money makes it equally enjoyable.
Absolutely. How much money have you actually raised so far?
I'm around about £350 just on this challenge so far. I'm hoping to get up quite a lot by the time I've finished the walk. It's one of these charity things that's a bit of a slow burner. But I'm hoping as we get nearer to the end, we'll have a bit more of a input into those funds.
Is there anywhere people can go to donate if they'd like to? I'm sure if there is, I'll share it in the show notes, which will be above, below, wherever you're listening to now.
There certainly is. I'm on justgiving.com /fundraising /Mark-Smith 850.
There we go, and that'll be in the show notes below. So if you'd like to donate, if you can donate, please go ahead and do that. I'm sure Mark and Kidney Care UK and Friends of Harrogate will be very much appreciative of that. And now we'll come back into your transplant. You seem a very active person. You enjoy hiking.
Yeah.
How much did taking part in sport, physical activity before your transplant help to sort of counteract the natural decline in fitness that you see when you're going through such a serious illness?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't as sporty as I am now, and it's actually quite a marked difference between the things I did before the transplant to what I do afterwards. So essentially, before the transplant, hiking is a really good example. I was not a particularly keen hiker. in any way. I used to actually think a bit of a chore, even just going into town to get stuff.
Yeah.
I always thought you go for a walk because you need to go and get something from somewhere, rather than just for the simple pleasure of going out walking.
Yeah.
And there's a reason I believe that's changed, which I'll come on to at some point. Um, I obviously did do walks and did go out, and played little bits of football and other sports. But yeah, I was not massively sporty before the transplants. I was always too concerned, particularly in those later years, with how my diabetes was and how that was affecting me, um, to kind of trust myself to go out and do any kind of big events. I'd always be worried that if I went out walking, how much stuff I'd need to take with me to counter low blood sugars, like taking lots of sugary drinks with me and bits and pieces. It didn't put me off entirely. We go up to Paley Bridge, which is kind of 10, 15 miles away from here, and do walks around there. But that was pretty much the extent of the walking. But what I've always felt with diabetes, the one bonus of diabetes, if there is any, is you tend to eat a lot healthier than a lot of people do, because you're not eating sugary snacks and sweets all the time and things. And nothing wrong with those, of course, but it's everything in moderation, isn't it? And with diabetes, you're kind of really forced to control that. So having that kind of diet really helped keep my fitness a lot. I used to go and do bits of cycling and bits and pieces. I had a brother who passed away who was a keen cyclist. Just bits and pieces like that, really. The transplant saw a massive change in direction in terms of my sports levels and overall fitness, strangely.
Why do you think that was?
Well, I wanted to see the transplants as not just something that has saved my life, but it has had the potential to change my life. And I made a conscious decision that when I was in hospital in Manchester, I heard about the transplant games, so I wanted to get involved with that. And then we had a lot opportunity on a family holiday in Wales with my father-in-law to go climbing up Snowden. And again, before this transplant, this was something I would have never even considered doing. And I thought to myself, this will be a really big thing to do. If I can achieve this, and it was still within my first year of the transplant, I thought this will really set a marker for what I can do. It came alongside with helping kidney care as well, with a few bits and pieces. I've been down to Parliament and spoken in Parliament as part of kidney care to talk about organ donation with them. And so that came a shoe in as well from a charity point of view. And what I always found interesting was my donor was also a keen hiker. Now, whether I've got that from him, you can never absolutely categorically say, but it's nice to think that there's something in that he used to go walking up in the lakes a lot, and whether just something within him has been passed on to me and infused that keenness of hiking into me is a really, really nice feeling to have. It's like a nod to him as well at the same time.
It's a great story, and if it has passed on from your donor, I'd better see if my dancing's improved. Hello, Mum.
Well, you never know.
Did your transplant all go smoothly? Has it been working well since you had it?
Yeah, it has been going really, really well. I've had a few teething issues in the early days, and the diabetes, I was diabetic for 25 years, and it's caused a lot of damage over the years. Obviously, I won't list off everything in anything that it did, but that first year of the transplants, I used to intermittently have problems with my bladder, which I think is down to neuropathy. And post-transplants, that came back with a vengeance. So now I have to self-catheterize every day. So essentially, I can pass it mostly on my own, but just to make sure it's truly empty, I had to do that at least a couple of times a day. I also ended up with a stomach infection, which is called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which gives you symptoms similar to Crohn's and IBS mixed together. So it's not fun. I'm on antibiotics and have been for years, just to keep that down. And some days they work better than others. So some days I can feel absolutely lousy because of that condition. And I also have pernicious anemia as well. And those things all came post-transplants. Also within that first year, I had some backing up onto my kidney, so I had to have a drain put back in for a couple of weeks. So it wasn't, the first year wasn't amazing. I dealt with quite a lot of stuff over there, and some of those conditions, as I say, I deal with day by day. Even with all the hiking I do, I just kind of push them to one side and just get on with it. Other than that, yeah, everything is working really, really well. Both the kidney and pancreas. The pancreas is about, yeah, it's working like an absolute dream.
It's good to hear. Always nice to hear when somebody transplants doing well. And based on what you've said there, I didn't want to sort of break it up or stop the flow of your speech or whatever. A couple of questions that I've got on that. The first of all, the fact you've had a pancreas transplant, does that, forgive me if this is ignorant, does that sort of cure the diabetes?
No, it's classed as an extreme form of treatment.
Similar
So
to a transplant then? It's not, a
yeah,
transplant's not a cure, it's a treatment.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. On the same premise that when my kidney fails, I'd be onto dialysis, would need another transplant. When the pancreas stops working, I could just go straight back to having all the injections and everything that I would have had
Yeah,
normally
yeah.
with diabetes. So technically, I'm still actually classed as I think if you're talking really technically, I'm classed as a transplant recipient with a functioning pancreatic graft, which basically forestalls the diabetes while I have it.
I maybe worded that poorly then. It's, yeah, it all makes sense now. So, like, I've had just a kidney transplant, which isn't a cure, it's a treatment for kidney disease. So you're classed as
Yeah,
having kidney disease, but you're being treated by the transplant. And
absolutely,
while I've got
yes.
this transplant, I'm not experiencing the same sort of effects of severe kidney disease that I had before. With your pancreas, yes, you've still you've got the functioning graft, but that's keeping the, I hope I'm wording this right, keeping the diabetic effects away for now.
Absolutely right.
Got
Yeah.
it.
So
Got it.
as if and when it fails, and hopefully it won't fail for many, many years. Yeah, I say I'll just go straight back onto injections and the diet and everything that comes with it. But boy, am I enjoying every moment I have without it. Diabetes is horrific, and those people who have it who know, um, uh, against those people who don't have it, it is a truly awful thing to live with. It's the routine it had to follow, it's just so tiring and hard to cope with. Even for the people who look after it really, really well, it can cause some really nasty side effects over the years.
Do you have to be more careful with what's sometimes referred to as post-transplant diabetes?
No, I've never had any issues with that at all. You can get it, but no, I've not had any issues at all with that, strangely enough. And thankfully too.
Good to hear. And you mentioned self catheterization in there. I'd never heard of it. I've never heard anyone do it before until
Yeah,
this podcast. You're now the second person to mention that. And people may now be curious as to like if it happened to them or what may come in the future. And
yeah,
now I know the other. I'm not going to give away names, but you may have listened to that already. Um, they catheterized through their belly button through a procedure that sort of linked it to the bladder. So
yeah.
are you that way as well, or are you the more traditional method?
Mine's the more traditional method. I don't know which is the better of the two, to be honest. But um, yeah, it's just because of the diabetes end up with neuropathy across various parts of my body. Most common one is in my feet, so I have neuropathy in my right foot, and I have a lot of issues caused by neuropathy, and the bladder is one of them. So essentially, without wanting to be too technical, so your sphincter muscles in your bladder, which control your output, those don't work properly. So when I try and pass and go to the bathroom, not everything comes out when I go. So I basically, for want of a better way of putting it, stick a tube in and it just drains the rest off just naturally. Well, as naturally as possible.
Yeah. Moving on from the sort of the illness side, after you'd had your transplant and you'd recovered from that, how long did it take you to regain your fitness again, and how did you start to build it up?
On the day I got home, I went and did a walk around the block. Literally the day I got home, because I didn't want to just hang around and wait for things to get better. I knew the only way to recover from such a big operation and to give it its best chance of survival was to get myself reasonably fit. And Yeah, it started on day one, little 400 meters walk, and then I think it was about 9 months later. I was climbing up Mount Snowden, and that was the biggest difference. And for me, building that fitness up to get to that level was a huge achievement, and it really felt I could push on from that. And the fitter I felt, it felt for me that it gave my transplants a much better chance of lasting a long time as well. Just from a circulation point of view and a health and fitness point of view, and sort of oxygenated blood, and all the things that really helps you with your fitness. Um, and that's what I wanted, to give my transplants the better chance of survival as I could possibly give it.
Did you have any set goals or targets that you wanted to hit, or a task you wanted to complete by a certain time?
Not particularly. I didn't set out to do any planning as such. I just knew that I wanted to go bigger and further and harder each time I went out. Um, so from doing Snowden, the next challenge I wanted to undertake was the Yorkshire Three Peaks. So I set out with a plan to do that. I set out a plan to go and do lots of mountain climbing or walking. I'm not a climber, but certainly lots of walks up big mountains, and increase the distance each time. Certainly over the course of a few of the months leading up to the walk, just build that distance up. Get to the point where actually doing the Three Peaks was actually a shorter walk than I would just do on a normal training walk. And that was my plan, really, was to do something bigger than the actual challenge I was going to undertake. And that's a routine I've stuck to.
So you've got a great attitude towards it, keeping fit, pushing yourself harder each time. What was the sort of time frame from transplant to Snowden to Yorkshire Three Peaks?
Well, I did, let's say it's around about 9 months after the transplant when I did Snowden. I did the Three Peaks in May 2015, so it was about 6 years after the transplant, just short of 6 years. Um, and I also took on after May, literally the following month, I did Ben Lomond up in Scotland. Because again, I'd achieved that fitness, I wasn't going to let it go to waste. So I took on Ben Lomond, which was a tough mountain to climb. It's no easy mountain, that. And then Hadrian's Wall was literally the year after, and that was where we did 88 miles over 6 days.
I've written it down here. Ben Lomond is 3,195 feet, which is
Yes,
it's tall.
yeah, it's not shabby at all to do that. And what was a real treat with that, just as an aside, was we got to the top and it was a beautiful, warm, clear, sunny day, and we could see right down, all the way down to the bottom of Loch Lomond from the top of it. It was just immensely glorious.
That I think that's one of the key things about these big hikes that you've done through mountains and everything like that. And something that I'd like to do without giving away too much. I'd quite like to get into of where I am. I'd quite like to get into the peaks over the next year.
Yes,
But yeah, you mentioned Hadrian's Wall in there, 88 miles that you completed, and that
yeah,
was with your donor's mum.
yeah.
How did it feel to meet your donor's parents as you've met both? And was that something that since you'd had your transplant, you'd always wanted to do since then?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the story of how we came to meet. I think because that's quite pertinent to your question. Um, Not long after my transplant, I wrote to my donor family, just because, like most transplant recipients, you want to say thank you. And I know for a lot of people that those words don't come easy, and not everybody writes, and that's totally understandable. And it was on the anniversary of my donor's death that I got a letter back. Um, Part of the diabetes had meant me and my wife couldn't have children naturally, so we've gone through 3 lots of IVF leading up to the transplant, none of which had worked. And we were allowed to have another attempt post-transplant, and that one worked. So I wrote back to my donor family, and essentially the people doing the IVF treatment said they wouldn't carry on if I ended up on dialysis. They had to take into consideration the care of any children we may have and my ability to look after them, given I was going to be the stay-at-home parent. So indirectly, you could argue that that gift came at a time which meant we could go back and do the IVF, and then it worked. So we felt that letting my family know, the donor family know that indirectly their son's gift had helped us have a daughter was really important. And they obviously were really, really chuffed. And they'd set up a charity in their son's name. I won't go into all the details, but their son was a victim of manslaughter. And so their charity works around that. And they wanted to use some of my letter I wrote to them as part of their charity work. And I actually said, I'd be quite happy to come over and be more involved directly. And that's really how we got to meet. I actually met them in 2011, just a couple of years after the transplant. And we actually ended up on daybreak one morning, which was hilarious. We got to have breakfast with Steps in the green room, and things, much to my wife's delight, who's a Steps fan. So that's how we initially met. And then when I decided to do Hadrian's Wall in 2016, I'd set it up for quite a while and was going through the process of raising some money for it and what the walk was going to be and how it's going to work. And my donor's mum, Pat, got in touch with me a few weeks before and said, do you mind if I come on that walk with you? How could you say no to that? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it was I was so immensely proud to have her along and to be able to just spend that quality time with the mother of her son who had given me that gift. It was hugely emotional, and everyone we met was just gobsmacked and quite blown away by the two of us doing that route together.
It must have been such a special 6 days of walking that you could do it with her.
Yeah, I was hugely honoured that she was there with me, and for her as well. I think she felt honoured too in a way because it felt to her like she was walking with part of her son.
It's a great story. It must, for both of you, it must be an unbelievable feeling. Have you done much hiking before that?
Apart from the three peaks and the other mountains, I hadn't done um, walking over consecutive days before. As part of my training, I made myself do that, but certainly not leading up to Hadrian's Wall. That's the most number of days I've walked in one go, or certainly over a number of days consecutively that I'd ever taken on. So certainly, yes, the three peaks is a tough challenge. Ben Lomond is a tough challenge, but they were all single day walks. And to walk for 6 days over some of the Hadrian's Wall walk, which some of it is not easy. You go right through the middle of the country. It's up and up and up, right through the middle of Northumberland. And to do that, you have to be really, really fit. So to get that level of fitness, to be able to do that, again, was just another achievement for me. It pushed my own barrier further than it had been before.
Had your donor's mum done much training or hiking beforehand?
Nope. She does running, and she occasionally takes part in the odd half marathon, which is probably perfect training. I'm not a runner, so I can't equate hiking to running. My knees, if I try and run 100 meters, my knees say, "What do you think you're doing?" But from in terms of walking, no. When she joined me, she literally had about a week's training
Oh, wow.
before she came to join me. She ended up with lots of blisters and everything, but she was able to raise some money for her own charity as well as being part of what we were doing.
On the topic of charity, how much, it was for Kidney Care UK, your side again, wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
How much did you raise?
For when I did Hadrian's Wall, it's just short of £1,800.
Nice work. Good.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I'll big you up now. You've raised, please correct me if I'm wrong, you raised £16,000 for charity to date.
It's approaching 17,000. I know it's small differences, but yes, it's just coming up to about £17,000 to date, which not all of it walking, which I'll explain in a bit. But hugely proud. It's far more than I ever imagined I would ever raise for charity. Ever had no plan to raise that amount of money, and I'm immensely proud that I've been able to do that.
It's a fantastic achievement, and for context, the 16,000 was a figure that I believe that you'd written on a message to me, I think earlier this year. So
Yes,
in that time, you've gone from 16,000 to nearly 17,000, which again,
yeah,
the acceleration is still there, and you're keeping going.
it is. Through the pandemic when I couldn't walk, just to sort of paint a little picture of where some of that money's come from. Obviously, I've got the 350 I'm raising currently, but I also did when I really couldn't go out anywhere, and to help keep my fitness up. I hadn't been on a bike for years and years and years. I lost a younger brother in a road accident many years ago when he was only 21. So bikes for me were not evil, but they're just not something I was comfortable being
Yeah.
on. And through the pandemic, because I knew I had my my walk still to come, um, I wanted to keep some of that fitness up. And my mum and dad brought round their exercise bike, and I decided one day that I was going to cycle 100 miles in a day. And I did that, and that raised a good, I think it was about £400 or £500 doing that, just on its own, with a nice little stint on Radio York the day after, talking about it, and a little piece about mental health as well and things. So yeah, so not every penny's come from walking. There have been a few other bits and pieces as well, and in fact, hiking has not been the main contributor to that figure. More than half that figure came from a single event, which I will come on to at your convenience.
May as well go for it now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in 2016, some months after I'd walked Hadrian's Wall, and as a result of the neuropathy in my foot, I was doing a walk up near Malham in the Dales, and my foot slipped on a walk, just coming down a dry waterfall, and it just felt like I'd twisted my ankle a little bit. And what I'd actually done was broken the bones in the middle of my foot, all the little bones, all the metatarsals in your foot. I apologise if I've got the wrong bones, but it's all the little ones in the
Yeah,
middle
yeah.
of your foot. And I didn't know about it for some weeks until my foot was really swollen and I'd lost the arch in my right foot. And I ended up being in a walking boot, just one of those moon boots,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
yeah.
and a cast for probably about 6 months or so altogether. And I was told I'd probably only be able to walk maybe 5, 6 miles on a flat. It was devastating for me at the time. So it felt my walking days were over. Walking 5 or 6 miles to me felt, well, most people can do that. And it didn't feel that it was anything particularly special, to be able to do that. So I've had to be really patient to build my foot back up. But in the meantime, I also didn't want to be idle raising money. So I decided, it just popped into my head one day, why don't I do a charity dinner? Never held one before, had no idea what I was doing. A year later, we had 180 guests at a hotel in Harrogate, including the mayor and mayoress, and we raised a profit of over £11,500
Oh, wow.
during that charity dinner. It was hugely successful, and so many people want me to do a second one. Obviously, pandemic aside, of course, one will happen at some point in the future when it's relatively safe to do so. So yeah, that's where a significant amount of the money has come from, just from that one single event. But it all helps, and it all helps patients, and kidney care support a lot of people up and down the country with grants and support, and help transplant sport as well, and various bits and pieces. So I like to think, even doing the charity dinner and even the small amounts to raise, it all makes a massive difference to them.
Absolutely. You're doing a lot of good for the charity and also for people in our position who've had kidney transplants or are suffering from kidney disease, on dialysis, whatever stage they're at. You're doing a lot to help them. So thank you for that. And hopefully it continues and you can raise more money for the charity to help more people out. I've got a couple more questions on hiking before we move on to your volleyball. When you do these long walks that last a few days, like Hadrian's Wall, where do you sleep? Do you wild camp?
No, I think I've got too many things to deal with health
Yeah,
wise to do that. Particularly with the catheters and the
of
potential of my
course.
stomach having going wrong. So how we planned Hadrian's Wall is we walked from the Solway Firth side and walked across to Newcastle. So we spent a couple of days in a travel lodge in Carlisle. We got a bed and breakfast halfway across, and then for the latter half of the walk, we rented a cottage out at somewhere. I can't remember the name of the place, but we rented a cottage out, and the family came up, so we had somewhere to stay every night that at least had um, decent facilities that we could use and just be a little bit more comfortable. Yeah, wild camping is. I'd love to do it, but I think my other conditions would probably make it a bit tricky.
Yeah, that makes sense, and sounds like you made a smart decision there. Another question came in. I asked for some listener questions on social media If you'd like to get involved with that, you can, if you follow all the Transplants Take on Sport social media pages, that's at Transplants Take on Sport Pod on Facebook and Instagram, and at TTOS Pod on Twitter. The day before the recording, I'll put something out on there saying who's coming on, what they do, what the sports are, what the transplants are, and there'll be a little question box on Instagram, or you can comment them, DM them, Facebook, Twitter, everywhere, however you want to get in touch. And if you do that, you can also find out who's coming on the podcast before they do, and have the chance to feature by asking your question. And this week we've got a question from Karen, who says, "Could you ask Mark who he would most like to walk with?"
Oh, now that's a really, really good question. Who would I like to most walk with? I can't think of his name. I can picture him. What's his name? I'm really not very good at
Is
remembering
this
people's
somebody
names.
well known, or?
Yes. Well, from a Hollywood point of view, I'd like to walk with Kirsten Dunst, but that's a different story. He's the professor who does all the astrophysics, Brian Cox.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to go walking with him because that's just a sort of personal interest of mine, is sort of be able to talk about space and planets and all that sort of stuff. I just think it would be an amazing experience to do that.
I'm going to slightly flip that question to one that's quite a common question people get asked in. It's normally a dinner situation. If you could
Go
pick
on.
three people, dead or alive, to go on a hike with, who would they be?
Three people, dead or alive. One would be Einstein. I think he'd
Yep.
be really, really interesting. Julius Caesar.
Okay.
Yeah, really. I did an archaeology degree at university, so Roman history is a particular interest of mine. I think it'd just be really interesting to kind of get his mindset and find out more about the sort of person he is. And Freddie Mercury.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. You got your entertainment there.
Yeah, I think I'm a big Queen fan, and I think walking with him would be entertaining in itself.
It's a good mix there. Very good mix. What sort of hikes or challenges have you got planned next, if any?
Yeah, I'm planning on two next year. So this year, the nice thing about the 850 challenge is I've not necessarily had to go and do big walks each week. Some weeks I've just broken them down into small walks, and that's fine. What I plan to do is go back to my more traditional kind of distance walks, but over a week. So I'm looking at two. There's a 35-mile walk, which although doesn't sound very far for what I can do, this one's to be done over 24 hours, and it's walking from the top of a place called Sutton Bank, which is between us and the coast, kind of Thirsk Way, Moulton Way, over sort of more towards East Yorkshire, to the top of Rosebery Topping, which is in the Cleveland Hills. So straight up north from there, 35 miles, 24 hours. So that'd be quite a challenge to walk for that length of time in one go. Will be different to anything I've done before. And again, it just keeps pushing that barrier a little bit further. And the other one is one I've found. I've recently joined the Long Distance Walkers Association, which has given me access to lots of different paths that even I didn't know existed. And there's one that goes from a place called Kettlewell up in the Dales, and it comes all the way down to Langsett in the Pennines. It's called the Yorkshire Waterway. It's 104 miles. You walk past 20 different reservoirs, around about 16,000 foot of climbing in total of that distance. And that's what I'm planning for next year as well.
A lot to look forward to, and challenges, but also interesting places to see. And I think, I've been out walking a lot during the lockdowns that we've had, and the breaks from lockdown when it's been easier to get out for walks. And
Yeah,
it's something I'd like to do more of in these sort of away from my local area, getting out into the mountains, hills, wherever you want to go. So yeah,
yes,
it's definitely a good thing to do. And
oh, definitely.
you're not only a keen hiker, you have taken up volleyball. What led to that?
Yeah, this is a throwback to my brother that's not with us anymore. Just for this sake of inclusion, I do have another brother who's still alive. So I'm the eldest of three. My little brother's actually in the police force, and lives far away from us. So we do speak quite often, but not as often as we'd like. But that's that. But my middle brother is he really enjoyed playing volleyball, and it's something I was always used to go and play with him from time to time. And with the transplant games, it just became something that I wanted to do. I think the first transplant games I went to was in Sheffield in 2013. And I took an archery and tennis and stuff like that. But just because I wanted to have a go at stuff.
Yeah.
And the following year, it was when I went back. It was volleyball that became the thing, and I found out. I don't want to sound funny, but I found out I was reasonably good at it, and good enough to actually compete for medals. And we all know the transplant games isn't about winning the medals; it's about the camaraderie and the taking part and meeting fellow champions and just celebration of that life that we've got that we might not have had. But alongside that, it gave me the opportunity to just go that little bit step further. And you probably discovered by now, probably realised by now, I'm quite competitive with myself. And to be able to go and actually achieve something like that and have the potential to win medals was a real push for me to be able to do that. And I think, yes, in 2018, when we last had the Transplant Games, or 2019, the years keep vanishing into obscurity these days.
I think it was 2019.
Yes, when it was in Newport in Wales, and I won a bronze medal in volleyball. Well, just to put into context, it was 2 days after I did a 17-mile walk in the Brecon Beacons with 4 mountains in one day, 10 hours of walking on what's probably the hottest day of the year. And then 2 days later, I got that bronze in the volleyball. So that for me was alongside the other charity achievements. And that one wasn't for charity, that was just for fun, believe it or not. You look back on it and think that would have been a great charity walk if I'd known or thought about it. But yeah, that again pushed that boundary for me and showed me what my body and what people could be capable of if they choose to do that.
Absolutely. Have you got plans to go to more transplant games and possibly even try and get yourself into the World Transplant Games?
We'll see about the World Transplant Games. Yeah, the next ones are going to be in Leeds, and of course here in Harrogate we are not far away from Leeds at all, so it's almost like the home games for me in a way. So yes, I will definitely be going back and doing the Transplant Games there and taking part in the volleyball again. Maybe see if we can change that colour of the medal.
Well, fingers crossed, and hopefully see you there in Leeds next year. Mark, it's been a pleasure to chat to you today. I think your attitude on the whole transplant life and pushing yourself forward, staying active, really is inspirational, and people can learn a lot from what you've said today. One more question before we go, and regular listeners will know it's the one I ask everyone at the end of the podcast. What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone facing a transplant?
Don't see it as a life sentence or as the end of what your life might have been. And part of the reason I can go out and do inspirational talks, so obviously my story is a lot more detailed than what we've talked about today, and it's because I saw my transplants as an opportunity, not as a barrier. So it's an opportunity to open doors to a life I never imagined was possible. It was an opportunity to take on a new way of living that was better than one I ever had before, one I could ever imagine before. And that's what you have to hold on to. It's the prospect of what's coming that you can control, that you can make of your life, and how you can build on that life to make your life as good and as successful as possible. And a transplant can help you achieve that. I know it can't be achieved by everybody because we all have our own physiology to deal with, and people do have issues, and I totally respect those. But if you have the wherewithal to do it, it's an opportunity, and an opportunity to grasp with both hands and live that life.
Absolutely. And there we go. Thanks again to Mark for coming on the podcast. If you're enjoying what you're hearing so far, if you're liking the podcast, you've listened to a few, please do tell your friends about it, as anyone can listen to this, whether you've had a transplant or not, whether you're into sport or not, whether you play or not, or if you don't fall into any of those categories. I hope you can find something and take something from the inspirational and uplifting stories from the guests that come on and have a chat and open up about their experiences. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, that is the most listened to or most used app to listen to the podcast on. So it would mean a massive amount to me if you could go and rate the podcast 5 stars on the show page, as it really does help more people discover the podcast on there. And if you're feeling extra helpful, if you leave a 5-star review, all reviews that are 5 stars will be read out at the end of the podcast in this section here. I know last week when I was talking to Ryan, I mentioned the Acast supporter feature that's somebody else's voice at the start of the podcast that says if you'd like to support the podcast, you can do. That was after previous guest Ray donated a very generous, I've got to say, £200 to help the podcast going forward. I didn't actually say where that link was. So if you scroll, this is only if you want to, no pressure at all to donate. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the show notes, there'll be a link that says, I think it'll say supporter or acast.support or something like that. That's where you can go if you'd like to donate. As I said before, this podcast is now every 4 weeks because once this is out, I'm back at university. So please do keep supporting. Thank you for your support so far. This is not going anywhere. We are keeping this going for as long as possible. Thanks once again to my guest today, Mark Smith. I've been Lewis Daniels, and you've been listening to Transplants Take on Sport.